Hello, Gorillas. This is episode 5, season 3 of Gorilla Opera Podcast. My name is Tae Kim, Ensemble pianist, and I'll be your host for this episode. Today, we'll focus more on the non-musical aspects of an opera, and we're joined by Deniz Khateri, whose shadow puppetry enchanted the audience and the musicians alike in Marty Epstein's Rumpelstiltskin. Her collaboration with Eliana de la Guardia in Papillon by Kaya Zariaho will be showcased in an upcoming Gorilla Backer Bash on 21st and 22nd of this month. Let's dig in. Thank you for joining us today. Let's start with your work in Rumpelstiltskin. This was your first collaboration with Gorilla Opera. How was that experience?
Well, first of all, Gorilla Opera, I had been stalking them for years. I really like their work. The fact that they're open to experimenting with pretty much anything in the opera and very exciting things, that made me a fan of their work. So when they actually offered me to collaborate with them, I was, very happy, and I was really glad that that's happening. But generally, yeah, I mostly do theater, and I work on plays. I've also done shadow puppetry works on contemporary classical music. So a lot of pieces that I had worked on were not actually plays, and were just, they were just pieces of music, like music sheets I had to listen to and know what the instruments are going to be and things like that. But this was actually my first time collaborating with an opera company. Which again is a unique company. It's not like a very typical opera company, because they do very different things. So yeah, it was really exciting. It was a very interesting process. The fact that they were very open to changing things, which I am really good at. It drives people crazy when they work with somebody who tends to change ideas and come up with something very last minute. But they were, very open to that. We actually did our first performance in Boston with shadow puppets, but then for our work in New York, we decided to go with the digital shadow puppets piece, which is technically an animation, but I don't like to call it an animation, because that was something that I kind of deliberately wanted to use whatever I would use in the shadow puppetry techniques and the shadow puppetry shows. So I kind of tried to do it only in the digital world. So I did not use any techniques that you would use in animation. For example, if you give all of those designs for puppets to an animator, what they usually do is you see a cartoonish walk cycle, and whatever choices that they make is very close to what usually animators do. And that's what usually I do with my own animations. But for this specific project, I decided to do kind of recreate the effects that I would do in a shadow puppetry, in a live shadow puppetry show. So that was a very interesting experience, because I always wanted to experiment with that. I wanted to see, okay, if I limit myself to what would be possible on stage, how would the animation look like? And yeah, and there are parts in Rumpelstiltskin that you might think that, oh, how would that be possible on stage? Which it is possible. It would look a little bit different, but it would be the kind of the same impression. So yeah, in terms of the process, the design, well, I had the pleasure of working with Marty Epstein, who was the composer of Rumpelstiltskin, before this collaboration. So I'm a fan of her music. I know her style. So that really made things a little bit easier for me. The challenges that I had, one of them was that I wanted Rumpelstiltskin to be genderless and not so much in a way that it would be, you know, not a human, not a creature. You know, I didn't like, I wanted it to be something that belonged to the earth, but also you can't really tell what's happening. And also because I found some humor in some parts of Marty's music and also the libretto. So the way that I approached the designing process was that I I was looking for that humor in the puppets. So that was something that I was kind of struggling with to you know, I was kind of debating whether to go with like that humor or just go dead serious. But then when I went with the humor, with my instinct, I figured that in the times or in the parts that the music and the libretto was very serious and very emotional, that humor actually worked.
Right.
So,
Right. Any favorite moments or hardships you distinctly remember?
we kind of decided to go with the digital version, kind of very last minute. Which, again, I mean, I like it, but in this case, it was a lot of work in a very short time for me. So I had to like make, it was, I think, around 1 hour, like around 60 minutes of animation in 3 weeks.
Wow.
Thank God I had the puppets designed, so the characters were there. I just had to come up with the style that I was looking for, and you know, all those things. So that was a challenge for me, definitely. Also, a very nice experience because I finally got to experiment with what I wanted to. Favorite moments were the moments that I was with the group, because this one, usually, you know, when you um, when you create a work of theater, it's all about teamwork. It's all about everybody being in the same room and experimenting together and rehearsing and everything. With this project, we didn't really have the luxury of being together that much because it was just a very different process, and the availabilities were different, and you know, the recording sessions were, you know, separate from the rehearsals for, you know, stage. I had just moved to New York, so it was really hard for me to go back and forth. So we figured something out, but it was mostly my assistant attending the rehearsals, so I couldn't really attend the rehearsals so often, which was something that I really missed. But my favorite moments were the moments that I could actually attend the rehearsals and be in the room with everybody else, and it was so much fun.
Yeah, I remember watching the production in Boston and was awestruck by the puppetry as it added a whole nother dimension to the opera. Could you explain the art behind shadow puppetry?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated by shadows, and I think in terms of the medium that it has on its own, it's under the umbrella of theater, right? So
Sure.
it's a live performance. It needs rehearsals. It has all the elements of theater, but there it has a very key and major characteristic that I think it has to be considered when you choose it to be your medium. Like, there are a lot of productions that you go and watch, and it doesn't use silhouettes or shadows, but also there are a lot of productions that use silhouettes and shadows, and it's like magnificent, and it's really beautiful and fascinating, but nobody really thinks about why it's chosen that way, why people chose to use the shadows and silhouettes. And I think one of the key characteristics of this medium is that it's, you know, it doesn't necessarily belong, like the characters and the atmosphere that you create with shadows it does not necessarily suggest any specific detail like class, like race, like gender, unless you want to make it about those things, unless you want to highlight those things. For example, you have a set as like everything is silhouettes, everything is shadow of a room. And in that room, there is the shadow of a frame of a window. Because it's a shadow, you can't tell if it's made of gold or if it's made of worn out wood. Is it, it doesn't necessarily suggest the class that you're, the social class that you're coming from. I mean, your character is coming from in that show. And that's something that I love about it. And I try to use it so much. And for Rumpelstiltskin, for example, that was one of the things that I thought was very good. Like it was a good choice, to use shadows, because let's say that Rumpelstiltskin was to be voiced by Aliana, right? So the voice was a voice of a woman, and then the character was, when you hear it, you're like, okay, that's a woman. But then when you see the image, it totally breaks these stereotypes. You don't know what you're listening to, what that creature is, what's behind that. What's the story behind that creature. So I think that's something that I really love about shadows and using silhouettes. One of the things that a lot of people use is, like, for example, make very simple and minimalistic shapes and use the shadows of those shapes. And that like simplicity, that minimalism can tell the story in a very subtle way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think there is the big question there is that whether you want those details to be shown or not. And if you want them, would it be more effective if you just see them on stage without a screen, just no shadows, no silhouettes, everything in daylight,
Right.
stage light, spotlight,
Right.
or whether you want to cover them.
Right.
And by covering, I don't mean it in a negative way, just like meaning as like just trying to show it as a very basic human story, regardless of all of those backgrounds or the ornaments.
So how did you personally become immersed in the world of shadow puppetry?
Well, shadow puppetry is actually one of the very first means of expression of human, like in the ancient times when man discovered fire, there was the shadow, and then people would dance around it and you would see the shadows over the tent. So I think it's very what do you call it, like basic human nature. That's what I love about it. And I think that's what makes everybody comfortable with making shadow puppets. As you mentioned, when you're a kid, you start using the shadows, you start playing around with them.
Like this?
Yeah, exactly. Using your hands, and you can, it's very accessible. It's very, you can use just cheap materials, cheap paper, or you can go very, ambitious with it. It could be like the most expensive show that you've ever worked on. So it's very flexible. And how I got into it was that, I was going to say that it's very human, instinct. And in my country, Iran, that's also one of the theater forms that people explore so much. Yeah, not so much recently, but in old times they used to use shadow puppets a lot. And that was kind of in the back of my mind. And I think I remember once I had an idea for a project that was very cartoonish, but back in the day, I didn't know how to make animations. So, and I was like, my job is to bring everything on stage. So how can I bring that on stage? And I just kept seeing silhouettes and shadows. And it's like, why not make it a shadow puppetry show? So I started experimenting. I started learning on my own. And then later I took some workshops and master classes. And I just got into it so much that I was fascinated by it. I was like, it's a great way to express whatever story and tell whatever story that you would like to tell. And it's actually, as I said, very, very flexible. Like, it could be a very short piece, but with a lot of words to say. It could be totally silent, but still has a lot of words to say. It could be only music. It actually worked really well with modern music, as I've been experiencing it. But yeah, I just got into it and loved it.
That is so awesome. Speaking of modern music, the production for Papillon by Sarajevo in the upcoming Guerrilla Backyard Bash has elements of shadow puppetry. Could you elaborate further on this work?
Yeah, sure. So I remember the first meetings that we had with Julia and Aliana. There was this discussion of having birds or feathers and like having a creature coming into flying. So we had this idea and I started listening to the music. And usually what I do is I listen to the music several times and then I let the sounds lead me to the visualization, as probably a lot of artists do. And what happened was that it just, my instinct was telling me that this is more about the process of getting into flying. So the closest thing that came to my mind was the caterpillar, making its own cocoon and becoming a butterfly, and reaching to a point that it will finally fly. So we started experimenting with that idea, and initially I wanted to use shadow puppets for it, but then the longer I thought about it, the more I was convinced that it has to be like the movement has to come from inside. When you manipulate a shadow puppet or any kind of puppet, as you breathe, even if you don't move it, the puppet moves, but it's still from the outside. So what I was thinking was that, this actually shouldn't be a shadow puppet. It has to be a silhouette of a person. So that's why I talked to Aliana and Julia, and we decided that it should be human body, and it should be the silhouette of that human body. And then we can, use the shadow of whatever we need for the set. So that's how it initiated. And then we started experimenting with some movements, choreographing, and things like that. And this is what you're about to see.
Definitely looking forward to it. I did get a sneak preview of the production, and I remember it being so intricate and meticulous that it was hard for me to believe that this was actually realized during COVID. How has this pandemic affected your art making?
It has affected, especially theater, in a lot of ways. And I think we're all like in the theater community, everybody's trying to make the best of this online medium for theater. And I think there are a lot of interesting things happening and discoveries happening. one of the discoveries that I personally had was that actually shadow works or shadow puppet works uh, work really well with this medium because, first of all, as you said, it could be very simple.
Hmm.
Um, it could be DIY. So
Right.
yeah, and it just needs, I don't know, cardboards if you have at home, and paper, scissors, and as long as you have a white screen, which could be just a white sheet hanging from your door frame,
Right.
you can make art, and you don't necessarily need to have a lot of people in the same room to make it happen, or a lot of technical requirements. So I think shadow puppetry is actually finding its own way through this online medium. Uh, but also, um, my own struggle for this is to come up with some ideas, maybe for the future, so that we actually feel the presence of the audience somehow. Because you can still record the performances and broadcast them live,
Right.
but it's still not the same as the experience of sitting in a theater, especially for the audience and of course for the performer. But yeah, I'm just hoping that we can find a way to do that. But in the meantime, I think shadow puppetry and silhouette works really fine through this medium because um, all you need to see is a white screen and some silhouettes and shadows on it, which does not really require a lot of lighting, or as even if you're, let's say, meeting somebody online via Zoom or Skype or whatever medium that you're using, it's still, if it's even a very simple meeting, you still need to adjust the light and
Right.
see how you look, and sometimes it doesn't
Right.
really
Right.
work
Right.
with the shadows, especially because they're kind of two-dimensional and flat. It's easier
Right.
to manipulate it in a way that the audience can have the best experience watching it.
Right. So I understand you're also writing a libretto. Uh, so not only you're an artist and you're a theater, you're a librettist. I'm guessing you're playwright as well.
Yeah.
What so my question is, what can't you do? So actually, can you tell me about this libretto called Salt?
Yes.
Okay.
So Salt was actually initiated from one of my friends. Um, the story, I don't want to spoil this story, but I had a friend, and also, like, I can't say one friend, but it was like lots of friends and lots of women around me in my country who were trapped in marriages that were abusive for a long time. Um, some of them are still trapped in those marriages, and some of them are not, because they're either their husbands, passed away, or you know they never got a divorce, of course, but you know yeah. So anyways, because I've seen those stories, real stories around me, and I've just seen how the woman was suffering, and how they were constantly looking for a way out, but they couldn't because of the norms of the society, because and it's interesting, when I say norms of the society, some of them immigrated to the US and other countries, Europe, and the norms of the society that I'm talking about is not necessarily the society of my country. Like, they're still trapped, even after like 40, 50 years of being in another country. So it's mostly the norms of the society that get stuck in your head, and the traditions and what people would talk about you afterwards and things like that. So because of those things, they could never think about getting a divorce, or it was because of financial situations. They weren't independent financially, so there was just a lot of reasons that they couldn't get out of those marriages. So I had this idea of a play that would actually portray these women, and it had been for a long time. So what happened was that I decided that, this story, because it has to be a monologue, it has to be the woman alone in this, I wanted to make it about that woman. I didn't want to bring the man into the story. So it has to be a monologue. It's very intense in terms of what's behind it and what the woman is saying all the time. So because of these two reasons, I decided that it has to be very short. At the same time, I was thinking that we're going to be inside the mind of this woman. So it has to be a piece with a lot of sounds. And it should not be like the actress should not be just saying the words. She should be maybe singing them or yelling them, or be free to explore how she wants to say those words. So I thought that this is actually perfect for a modern opera, a very short, piece. And of course, when you think about experimental opera, which company comes to mind?
I can take a guess.
Yeah, so I reached out to Aliana, and what happens next.
Well, that's very intriguing project. I worked with Aliana, I want to say 2 years ago, and it was just an improv concert. Well, I mean, at least my part was going to be improv, so it's going to be piano and voice. I mean, I improvise quite a bit, which is fine. I mean, nothing jazz or anything, but just whatever, I guess, in some ways, my own language. But trying to improvise with others has been kind of difficult, just because, well, they don't think how I think, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But so I was but with Aliana, it was very amazing to work with, in a sense where I will give her certain kind of ideas of what we can do, and some of the sounds that she would create or not create, and it was very helpful to collaborate in that sense. And I think she is definitely the best candidate in that. But definitely looking forward to it. So when is that gonna happen then?
That's something that we need to decide and talk about. We don't know yet, because we were very occupied with Papillon.
Right.
So yeah, hopefully after that we'll talk about it.
Right.
We just know that the music is going to be composed by my dear friend Bahar Royai, which Girl Opera knows also. But I think that's going to be their first collaboration.
Oh, very cool, very cool. Looking definitely forward to that. Do you have any other future works? I mean, this is essentially a composition at this point, So not only you do art, you write as you compose. I mean, making me feel bad over here,
I mean, I'm trying, and I wish I could do all of these things that you.
But you are. But this is amazing. But so do you have any other works that's coming up? Other projects?
No, I have well, actually, I do. I have a project that's going to be online, of course, at this time. But it's actually designed for an online platform. So it's going to be August 23rd, actually right after our work. It's going to be at the Tank, virtually at the Tank NYC. So they have a festival for online works, which is called the Lime Fest. And my piece is a very short play that will be performed at the same time by two companies, one in Tehran and one in New York. So what's happening is that the audience would see both productions next to each other at the same time. One of them is in English, translated, so the play is Farsi, and it's translated to English, and they see the American production. Next to it, it's going to be the Iranian production with all Iranian staff and crew. So what happens is that the audience can see both of them, but then they can vote which language they would like to hear. So this is how I'm kind of experimenting with the presence of the audience in the online platform. So we actually performed it before once, and I was just very surprised by how engaged the audience was. They were like in the live chat. You could see people fighting over the language. Like, hey, people, vote for Farsi. The other one would come and say, please, English, we want to see what's happening. So you could actually see that the audience was feeling the presence of each other, because it all depended on the majority of the votes. It wasn't just you changing the language for yourself. Your vote would matter to everybody else as well. So we're going to do that again, hopefully August 23rd. It's going to be suggested donation based because we want our audience in Iran to be able to see it, and they can't purchase tickets because of sanctions. So it's very crazy. But yeah, if people would like to come see it, they can check out the Tank NYC.
That's amazing. Wow, what an amazing idea, and I'm looking definitely forward to that.
Thank you.
Do you have anything to add?
No, I just think they're awesome, and I hope to work with them again and again and again. And I really hope that we can tour the Papillon to several places, because we've thought about like the logistics of how to tour it around, even during this pandemic. If even for the online platform, we've had discussions about like how to keep the social distancing, how to have the performance have mask in a way that it wouldn't interfere with the performance and their the shadow specifically. So yeah, I really hope that we could do it again and again.
I hope so too, as well, and hope that we get to share our art in person soon. Well, thank you so much for your time and your invaluable insights, and looking forward to seeing you and your work at the Gorilla Backyard Bash. That'd be wonderful.
So too, yes.
Yeah, thanks. And this concludes this episode for Gorilla Opera Podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and hope you can join us at the Gorilla Backyard Bash later this month. Till then.